But on average, it's $18,000 per student. Some go as high as $24,000 per student.
Wild.
Wow.
So we're actually top 10 in the nation for spending per student.
Top 10 in the nation.
But we're some of the lowest for proficiencies and results. I mean, the government has a monopoly on our education system. If you took that thought process and, the same way that they control our education system, if you move that to any other example, if you move that to Shelly's business as far as trucking, right? If the only truck drivers that ever are to work in Oregon only were controlled by Oregon politics, I mean, it would be a disaster.
It would be a disaster.
But, we would also say that's so unfair, right? Like, what happened to the private sector? Why can't we have choice? Why can't we make those decisions when it's our taxpayer dollars? Maybe the mom's staying home or maybe the dad's staying home. I don't know what it's entirely looking like for families, but they're making decisions because they're saying this doesn't serve my child anymore. And I, of course, am the keeper of my child, not the government. And I have to make the right decision for them. And it's sad to hear and see because they're holding us hostage as parents. In a 45-minute class, which is pretty average, you're getting 20 per student, 22 seconds to 1 minute of one-on-one time with a teacher. 22 seconds to maybe 1 minute.
And that's per day?
Yes.
Per day. One-on-one time with your teacher. That's sad. And this is why parents should be outraged. Out of 81,000 school and district employees, only 31,000 are teachers. 38.5% of education employees are teachers. That's wild, and we should be outraged.
I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the
Hey, welcome back to the podcast of the Oregon discussion of government efficiency, which we have today another podcast with the new co-host, which is not new anymore. But I'm Senator Mike McLane. I represent District 30, and I have here with my colleague, Representative Shelly Boshart Davis.
Always happy to be here. And I'm going to jump in here, Mike, and just tell a really quick story of yesterday. We were at the Oregon Business Council Leadership Summit, and I was talking to somebody, and they looked over and they said, "Is that Mike from the D.O.G.E podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And he said, "Do you think I could meet him?" And I was like, "Yeah, you can." And so I brought a fan over to Mike yesterday. So we're going to need to get an autograph and send that out to him.
Well, and for the listeners, if you want autographs, I'm happy to give them. Actually, there were, so we have one fan.
One fan.
And my fan club is one.
Yes,
But
there's a club.
But there's a club. I got a club. Mm-hmm. And so today we're going to talk about education, and we have with us Tracy Kramer. And Tracy, former state rep, now running for state senate, and has been on the education committee, which Shelly and I have not. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to talk about education today, but welcome to the podcast, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, just so the listeners know, could we have some background?
Sure. So Tracy Kramer, I'm running in Senate District 11. I served in House District 22, which was Woodburn, Jervis Brooks, and Northeast Salem. From my district, I've pretty much been there my entire life, and grew up there in a small little, very modest little place. I was literally born in the house I grew up in. Went to public school. My husband and I both went to public school. My dad was a truck driver, and my mom primarily stayed at home with us. Yeah, it was, we didn't have a lot growing up, but we had a lot of love, and sometimes that's all you need. So it was a great childhood. Grew up, ended up leaving, went to dental assisting school, and went back to the same area, was a dental assistant for 10 years. And then my husband and I also had multiple small businesses, one of which was completely shut down due to COVID. So it was a decade of building it and was destroyed very quickly, which really did prompt my attention to Oregon politics and wanting to get involved. At that time, we had three we had 3 kids, I believe, at the time, or if not, I was pregnant with number 3. And my friends and I actually got together and started a homeschool co-op. So that kind of sparked my interest into the education sector and thinking that we could do a lot better here in Oregon.
Well, one thing I heard from you right away is we have one thing in common, and that is we're both daughters of truckers, which I love.
Yep.
But with education and you sitting on the education committee and experiencing it firsthand, whether that's you in the homeschool arena or you being on the education committee during your term as a state representative, what would you say would be kind of the most shocking thing that you heard from the education committee, or perhaps what's out there now?
That's a loaded question. I think what was probably the most shocking was that time and time and time again on the education committee, I saw how much we were not focused at all in including families and including parents in the education conversation, which to me is very detrimental to children. Schools can educate, they can do what they want, but if we're not bringing in the parents, and we are deliberately not bringing in the parents.
And do you mean like in committee or in stakeholder meetings, or is it that parents themselves aren't showing up in the actual building, or they are showing up and they're not being heard?
Well, a little bit of all of it, all that applies. And, you know, the education sector, and I know neither of you have sat on the education committee, but it's no different than all the other agencies and things that Oregon continues to deal with on a downhill slide. And you see that, and you see that, and you see it breaking down really the family unit. How much time do parents have to attend school board meetings? How much time do they have to be in the Capitol during those hearings? You know, I hear from people in my district all the time. I know a young couple trying to buy a home that an average home now is like $500,000 in our area. So now you're talking about, you know, families having to work harder. It's really sad to see that, you know, and like I said, I know you guys don't sit in education, you sit on transportation and other areas, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing, repetitive over and over and over again, where these parents, they're not always as engaged as I wish they were. They're not in the committees, but then also from the state level, we're not encouraging them to be involved. There were several different bills that we had in 2023 that had different committees and different projects that that as a committee were discussing. And I was constantly saying, hey, let's add a parent to this group. They would not do it.
They just refused.
Absolutely.
They just refused.
Yeah,
well, we have a
absolutely.
stellar education system here in Oregon, and I say that a little tongue in cheek. Where do we sit? I mean, I know that this is something that we see in headlines all the time, and it's embarrassing.
And it is. I think folks want to know, you know, is the K-12 system in Oregon efficient, and where are we lacking? And then, of course, how do you measure efficiency, right? And I'm not a professional educator, and I haven't served on a school board, and I've been on the education committee, but I've been on the budget committee the entire time I've served in the legislature. And one of the, you know, the arguments is that we need more money, and we've seen more money come in. We've seen a whole new tax system set up, the CAT tax, the gross receipts tax, the sales tax, and putting billions more into education. And yet I've also seen that when you measure certain outcomes, Oregon continues to slide. And of course, that's a head scratcher because there's one, you know, theory, or at least folks who advocate that say, hey, if we just had more money. And I believe we send quite a bit of money, but we're not seeing outcomes the way we want. And in fact, when speaking about the Business Council's Leadership Summit you and I attended yesterday, they were talking a lot about the need to have Oregon focus on generating businesses and growth. And one of the things that I've done is I've talked to CEOs, business leaders, the men and women who grow the economy, but those who have decided not to grow or locate in another state, at least part of their businesses, and some who moved their corporate headquarters, very large businesses, to other states. And one of the things that they've said is that they have a hard time recruiting talent because a lot of folks, when they think about moving to Oregon, one of the things they cite is K-12. And they're concerned that the Oregon schools are not as good as the schools in other states. And so how much of that is true? And, you know, what are we spending per student and how does that compare to other states?
Yeah, it's a great question. One that I think needs to be talked about more. On average, we're spending anywhere. Now, there's 197 school districts, so it's hard to blanket the question entirely. But on average, it's $18,000 per student. Some go as high as $24,000 per student.
Wild.
Wow.
So we're actually top 10 in the nation for spending per student.
Top 10 in the nation.
But we're some of the lowest for proficiencies and results.
I think bottom, right? Like nationally, whether we're in the 40s, whether you're talking about
47th.
fourth grade, eighth grade, math, reading, whatever it is, we're in the 40th. Sometimes we're 48th, 49th, sometimes dead last. And yet you're saying that we spend top 10 in the nation per student. And the crazy thing though is that there's no bold changes out there. Like this is how we're going to turn it around. We've been seeing this for years. I will also note that Democrats have been in control for years and years and years. The money going to the students is the highest in the nation, some of the highest in the nation. And it's been that way for years. But what's wild is this idea that nobody is saying that's in control now. But I did notice Ben Bowman was on stage yesterday, and he said on stage with the other leaders of the parties, and he said we should be top 10 in the nation in education, which I thought was interesting for two reasons. One is because I never heard that from a Democrat before, because they have no decisions or ideas to change that around. But also in Christine Drazen's launch for governor, she said in that we should be number one in the nation to raise a business, to start a business, to work here, to raise a family, and to get a world-class education. And she's been saying that for forever, but also in her launch. And then you hear somebody else, a Democrat, say we should be top 10.
Yeah, the majority leader of the state house.
Yes, who's in control, who has all the power, and who continuously pushes things out that is not changing it, that's not turning it around. So we have top in the nation for spending, lowest in the nation for results, which is similar to our budget, is similar to taxes. We're top in the nation for taxes and some of the lowest for like livability here. So it's not a surprise, but in order to change some of these things around, what are some ideas? What are things that you have seen in your time in the legislature or as a parent that should be happening in order to change things around?
Yeah, well, when I ran in 2022, I was a huge proponent for school choice and still am. I believe 34 states now in the nation have some school choice or some formula of school choice. Oregon has none. I think that would be a huge game changer. I think that it is crazy and quite honestly, such a old way of thinking that the government has a monopoly on our education system. If you took that thought process and, the same way that they control our education system, if you move that to any other example, if you move that to Shelly's business as far as trucking, right? If the only truck drivers that ever are to work in Oregon only were controlled by Oregon politics, I mean, it would be a disaster.
It'd be a disaster.
But, we would also say that's so unfair, right? Like what happened to the private sector? Why can't we have choice? Why can't we make those decisions when it's our taxpayer dollars? And that's something I hear so often in my district and is so disheartening because individuals are making other choices. There's a massive amount of students that are fleeing our public education system for good reason. But they're doing that at sometimes really difficult decisions within their family of whether or not the mom has to go back to work or maybe the mom's staying home or maybe the dad's staying home. I don't know what it's entirely looking like for families, but they're making decisions because they're saying this doesn't serve my child anymore. And I, of course, am the keeper of my child, not the government. And I have to make the right decision for them. And it's sad to hear and see because they're holding us hostage as parents.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that it's the parents' responsibility to educate their kids. I think we all agree on that. And there are tools. So some parents choose to educate their kids through a homeschool, some a charter school, some public school, and which charters are a subset of public, some through private schools. And one of the questions, fundamental premise is, if you look at it's the government's responsibility to educate your kids, that's a different paradigm, right? And so one of the things we did in 2011, in my first term in the House, was pass a bill for open enrollment. And it had a sunset on it. And I believe since then, I think it was after I left the House that they did away with that, but I still think its legacy is having some positive effects. But the idea was, if you're in a public school, your school is not assigned by your zip code; it's assigned by your choice. And so, let's say a parent is in Salem, and so their kid's assigned to a public school, but that parent works in Woodburn, and so that child wants to transfer to Woodburn because, let's say mom commutes up, drops the kid off, works, picks up the kid. She's more likely to engage or more able to engage and being able to pop over at school, being a teacher's assistant or whatever. And so we allowed kids to transfer public schools. And the idea, I remember at the time, was, those public schools who are best run and best focused on kids and families are going to attract more students. And of course, what a lot of people realize, some may not, is that on every child who attends a school is a number. That is state money. So if your kid transfers from, elementary school in Salem to Woodburn, that money then goes to Woodburn. And so there were pushback on it to say that some of the schools are going to lose funding because other schools are going to capture it. And, my retort to that was good. I mean, we're introducing a little competition. And if you're losing students, if you're in Salem or I know in Central Oregon where I live, there were some kids that moved from Crook County High School to Redmond and vice versa because of, for an example, Crook County schools had a great FFA VOAG program. And kids would come to Crook County because they wanted that. And I always said, well, then pick it up. If you're a superintendent of a school or you're a principal of a school and you're losing kids because your music program is inferior, make a better music program.
Yeah. And
I think it worked. Now that's just between public schools and open enrollment. And I think now since the law reverted and, it wasn't renewed, or at least at a certain point wasn't, they still can, but they have to have permission.
Right.
Isn't that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So it's not a right anymore, but it should be.
Well, so do you think that, and this is, one of these questions that we'll never know, COVID, I think, amplified some of the problems that we had already
You're
seen.
right.
I think since COVID times, enrollment has dropped over 34,000 students from public schools here in Oregon. And I think COVID amplified that for a couple different reasons. One, parents were home and seeing what their kids were learning. And I think that there was a shock factor to say, we can't believe this is happening. Also, schools were really slow to open up. We were looking at other states across the nation and seeing other states opening up. Oregon was one of the last to actually open up, but you were seeing homeschools starting or pods starting where they're like, my kid's going to get an education. Private schools were opening up and they were having lists as long as you can imagine to try to get in to a private school. And not everybody has access to a private school. Or like you mentioned, there's tools. So you could get online, you could figure it out, especially since a lot of the parents weren't working or they were working from home. And so I think that COVID probably amplified the problem, although I think that this problem would still exist just because of the poor performance, unfortunately. But you lived through it in COVID. You were both you said that kind of sparked your interest in politics and being involved on a higher level because of COVID. And so I think that it did change things.
Yeah, it absolutely did. I think it opened, just like you said, I think it opened a lot of parents' eyes to realizing what their children are learning. It did. I mean, it made everything so much worse in so many ways. And I see that now as a parent and teaching young children. They don't learn over a screen, or there's only so much they're going to, right? There's a point you have to have some connection. So it absolutely made it worse. We weren't on a great trajectory before COVID. So that was not the root of all the issues. But it definitely made it worse. So it's and I think when you look at the numbers, it's just astounding to see how many students not only have left, but then you see and you compare maybe some of the numbers. We just talked about an average spending of $18,000 per student. And then you look at private school where the average is $12,000, significantly less. And mind, I also add that the $18,000 per student is not taking into consideration, because of course, homeschool, you think, well, a child who's obviously going to public school, you have to take into consideration the overhead, right? The cost of the buildings, the things like that nature. That doesn't include the bonds that we're also passing at a local level.
Really?
Which those are almost all districts, almost the 197 districts, almost all have a bond.
So wait, when you're talking $18,000 per pupil, you're not talking the cost of the building. You're not. So when you're talking about private school, they are talking about that.
Correct.
And I don't think I knew that.
So, and they're almost most of the infrastructure cost comes in our local bonds. So private or property tax and local bonds. And
Is there any
almost
numbers
all
out there that
districts
includes
have
that?
one.
Do you know? I would love to know that. If you were including the cost of building, especially these days, I mean, I could go into the, we had Lucetta Elmer on when she was talking about, prevailing wage and expanded prevailing wage and how much it costs to build a state building or a public school these days. It's wild. It's outrageous. And if you were to factor in those kind of costs, I can't even imagine what those numbers would be.
It's
Astounding.
not affordable. No. I can tell you that much.
So Tracy, do the operation budgets of schools, I assume those include maintenance of the buildings? So the bonds are just for the hard, for the construction, and then maintenance comes out of the budgets?
I don't know enough on exactly how the budget breaks down. I believe that the per student 18,000, I would assume that includes the staff and maintenance, because that's administration costs.
Right.
But it would be very interesting to see the totality of the cost, and also, it may be hard to pinpoint exactly what that would look like per student.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But regardless, you look at the numbers there again, you're talking 12,000 on average for a private school. Homeschool, you're looking at anywhere from $500 to $2,500.
That is wild.
And also a significantly less amount time. That
You and
it
I were
takes.
talking about that.
Yeah.
And how much time it would spend. And they've done studies with it, but if you're homeschooling a kid, how much in classroom or desk time or however you want, actually in the workbooks is substantially less than 8 hours a day.
Yeah. So, I looked that up. On average, in public school, a child's looking at, in a 45-minute class, which is pretty average, you're getting 22 seconds to 1 minute of one-on-one time with a teacher. 22 seconds to maybe 1 minute.
And that's per day?
Yes.
Per day. One-on-one time with your teacher.
Mm-hmm.
That's sad.
22
per
seconds.
day, not per subject, or
Well, for subject, for 45-minute class, they're getting 22
45
seconds.
minutes. Yeah, so subject, because yes, I see what you're saying. So like in math, 45-minute segment of a school day, it's a seconds to a minute and some per individual.
Yeah.
What's a class size?
That ranges to, depending on the area. I would say, at least in my area, the class sizes really weren't, in my opinion, too bad. I want to say there were 22 to 25 students per class. That does really differ depending on which district you're talking about.
Yeah, I would imagine there are some districts which, because of facilities or other things, have greater than 30 kids, which would be difficult. But given that you're an advocate for education, that took you to the House of Representatives, now you're running for the Senate. What have you learned about Oregon that has fueled this advocacy in education? And what is it that we're doing now where you just say that this cannot continue?
Well, we're failing our children, and in which case we're failing our economy. We're failing our state. We're failing in so many ways. And it is, as you guys know, you sit in different sectors when it comes to government, and all of I think when we see a lot of the statistics, it makes us shake our heads and wonder what is going on. And a lot of the issues with our government agencies, ODE, Oregon Department of Education, is lacking a lot of accountability, in my opinion. But when you are on education and you're talking about children, and we are the adults, we are the parents, we are the adults, we're supposed to be setting them up for success. We are supposed to be walking alongside of them and parents to say, let's figure out the best way that you can get up and get out and contribute to society. And we're not doing that. And we instead are closing our eyes to a lot of the issues. We're not, when I sat in education, I remember the end of session and I thought, we didn't do anything. We did not make a dent. We did not change it at all. Well, it feels horrible. It feels horrible.
That's a disgusting thought, right? You get through an entire session, a long session, right, in 23, and we only have long sessions every other year. And so you sat on the education committee and you got to the end of the session and you thought to yourself, we didn't do anything.
Absolutely. 100%.
We did anything to move the needle. We didn't do anything to better the education, even though you knew that we ranked some of the worst in the nation. You knew that we spent too much money. You knew all of these things. And you're not in power, right? You're in the minority.
Right.
And you got to the end of it and you said, this legislature didn't make a dent.
Isn't that tragic?
That's tragic.
That's
tragic. We only have so much time.
Well, that's true. And let's let our audience know about some of these statistics, like graduation rates, because clearly we want students to graduate from high school. Now, some students, because of choices that they make as a teenager or circumstances that they face, which are difficult, and I'm not here to criticize that, go and graduate via the GED program. But so what is our graduation rate and how do we compare?
Well, it is the only number that has gone up. It's actually pretty high. It's at 81.8%. However, it's important to understand and know that all of our graduation requirements are gone. So when you look at the graduation rates, okay, that might look really nice on paper that we're at 81.8%. But what are these kids graduating with? And when you look at the proficiency rates that are horrific, they're not graduating with the tools that they need to become successful.
So what's the story? How did Oregon get to a place where they suspended requirements for graduation?
It was a policy decision, right?
It was a little bit before my time.
It was just before you. Yeah, it was. I think I was in the legislature at the time, and they actually made a policy decision to suspend some of these requirements.
Which was supposed to be a temporary situation. I forget the exact timeline. I think it was summer of
during COVID.
24 that timeline was up.
Correct.
So they suspended for a certain time period. I believe it was the summer of 24 that it was going to reinstate the graduation requirements, in which then the committee met, and it was a bit, in my opinion, it was not a well-known, there again, a lot of closed doors, close the curtain and make the decisions, and not a lot of public comment. It was quite the situation. I remember me and my staff talking quite a bit about it, and I sounded the alarm and posted on social media that that this was happening behind closed doors, and there was some outrage, and they decided not to make the decision that the day they were supposed to, but ultimately they still came back and suspended it
as
even
we sit
further.
here today, Oregon still has no graduation requirements.
Correct.
So, just so that I understand and our listeners understand, if you're in a public school and you attend enough so that you're not, suspended, and you have no requirement to prove that you can do math, reading, spelling.
So there is a certain amount of credits that they have to acquire to graduate. But what that looks like, and there again, what the numbers or statistics look like on that student being educated and the tests that they should be taking does not exist. So there are credits, but that's not a great way to actually determine what the individual student knows.
So, as a state senator, I take it then you would seek to reverse that.
I certainly would love the conversation. And when I kind of sounded the alarm on the initial situation, I said, I'm fine with revisiting and talking about and coming to the table about changing the test or changing some of the protocol to make it, I did not love school. I was not a great test taker. I still have ADHD, was not diagnosed, but probably dyslexia. So school was not my friend. And so I can understand that from these students' perspectives of saying, hey, maybe at one single test or maybe the way that we're doing it isn't the correct way. And that's okay. I'm okay with having that conversation. But the problem is there's no conversation, and there's no proficiencies, and there's no, hey, let's fix the problem. It's just, hey, let's throw away this entire segment and just graduate and just move on, go get out of here. And that's what we're seeing. And it started too with the No Child Left Behind, which was my era of education. We're just pass you along and get done with you. And it's not doing these kids any justice. And we're seeing that in so many different ways. And it's just so detrimental. We're sending them off to the world
ill-equipped.
Yeah. And which was also why I was a huge supporter of the CTE programs. And we're seeing a lot of incredible things go on in that sector. But that's difficult too. And not every child has the ability to go to these CTE programs. In fact, probably very few if you're looking at the state as a whole. So I love those options, but it's not an option for everyone.
Well, Tracy, you've definitely been an advocate. As we were discussing, I remember an article and I found it, and a quote from State Rep Tracy Kramer, R. Woodburn, back during this time that we're talking about. You said, I think the bigger issue here is that the board has continued to remove standards and has not come up with a game plan. That's why parents and Oregonians are frustrated. Just because graduation rates are improving, it doesn't mean proficiency is.
Right.
And
good quote.
Yeah.
Good quote.
Well done.
Yeah.
Nice job, Tracy.
I stand by it.
This was also that time that I forgot about this, but to your point earlier that they're not listening to parents. This was at that same time that Christine Drazen, that was not in the legislature at the time, organized a public comment campaign spurring 11,000 emails sent to the board. 11,000 emails sent to the board,
Right.
and they didn't care.
Yeah.
They already had an agenda. They needed to move the goalposts because their graduation rates were not up to par. They knew it. And so they moved the goalposts. They changed the requirements so that they could increase this number, but proficiency wasn't there.
Right.
And actually later in the article, you had Dembro actually agreeing with you.
Senator Dembro.
Senator Dembro
Mike Dembro
literally
from
says,
Portland.
agrees with Kramer that more vigorous public debate should have occurred before
Yeah.
the board voted.
Yeah.
And that's how you started this podcast. You said parents aren't involved, and even if they are involved, they're not being listened to.
It's sad. It's so sad. And it's talking about our future people. It's talking about our kids. It's
Right.
trying to equip them with whatever that looks like. Some of them should be going on to higher education. Some of them maybe will go to a trade school. We need all of these different skilled professionals in Oregon. And there is a place for all of these children, but we are not listening to parents. We are not doing what we need to be doing at the state level. And then we have decisions made behind closed doors. They would have loved for that to have just snuck by,
Just changed it.
Just change it, and everyone can be quiet about it. And look at our graduation rates now.
Well,
they look so good.
That's what we see this time and time again. And
Right.
when we think, well, what happened? Well, somebody changed a rule somewhere behind closed doors or quietly that was not noticeable. But here on D.O.G.E, we like to talk about government efficiency. And when we talk about government efficiency, we love numbers. So a few that I think our listeners would be pretty shocked to hear. And this was from the ODE's, this statewide report card. Okay. Despite approximately 2,300 fewer students and 258 fewer teachers than the previous school year, ODE added 639 staff positions, none of which were teachers. The additional positions included 454 educational assistants, 365 support staff, and 11 district administrators. So you're losing students, you're losing teachers, but you're adding 639 staff positions. Make it make sense, Mike. You have been in the legislature longer than we have. Make that make sense. Where are we going with this?
I don't know. It's a mystery to me, frankly. And I just come down to, my own experience, the experience of, my generation, sort of the upper end of, or the older end of Gen X. And, when school was so different and we didn't have so many challenges like cell phones and social media and in the, the pressure on kids. So my experience is that your parents, saw your report card.
Yeah.
And, they address things if you didn't perform, or they would want to understand. And I was one of the lucky students at school, came natural. And I always academically did well. I think it was born because I was generally curious. And then, ultimately, one thing that really changed me in my perspective of education was my first term in the House in 2011. and I met with several community leaders, and they talked about reading levels and how important having a student read at third grade level by the time that student exits third grade. And in the statistics on everything from graduation rates and incomes, it was a long-term study and evaluation. Oregon made the choice, which I supported then, and I support now, to emphasize early learning, having kids read at, be proficient in the third grade. And, ultimately, the confusing thing to me is how did we get to where I saw a stat recently that beginning fourth grade, so this is after the summer of the third grade, that Oregon plummeted in kids, public school kids, who could read at that level at the time of they entered the fourth grade. And I don't know what happened. Was it the pandemic? I mean, there's so many ways you can point at it, and you say, what is going on? Tracy, in your experience and your advocacy, is this generation of kids that we're not serving with our system, are they facing pressures? Is there something different about them that are we taking an outdated system and forcing it on kids? Does our system need to change? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's a single answer to it. I think it is, and kind of what I was bringing up earlier, our economy and what is going on it's systemic. So when I talk about the pressures that a mom and dad have of buying a house in Oregon of an average of $500,000, when my in-laws bought a house here, of course, I know this was a while ago, but you're talking $34,000. Okay, so now you're taking a young family, you're telling them to buy their first home, that the average cost is around $500,000. What are you doing to that family? You're having them probably both work. Now who's at home? Who's with the kids? Who's there? And I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying, though, the pressure of it is very challenging. And then we see what has gone on in Oregon with our drug issues. Well, what happens when mom and dad, and then of course you're talking, these kids now also have a huge range to social media. So you're talking about a lot of different issues that are feeding into these children or the family unit as a whole and breaking it down. And Oregon has done a great job at breaking it down so that it makes the pressure so unbearable. And who suffers the most as an adult? We know a lot of us aren't going to go pick up drugs, right? They're working hard. They're going to go get another job because they got to afford this home. But what happens to the kids? What happens to the kids when no one's really looking out for them?
Well,
in the Great Recession, if I might add, that's when I ran one of the, most significant motivators, when I raised my hand and said, hey, I'll serve in the State House. And it was 2010, Great Recession. And my district was the hardest hit by the Great Recession. Our unemployment in District 55 and acutely in Crook County, my home county, Depression era unemployment. And so years later, I was still in the House of Representatives, and the superintendent for Crook County Schools asked me to meet with him. He wanted to go over some data. I said, sure. So he showed me that the kids that were just entering the school system in Crook County had plummeted in what they call ready to learn. And I said, well, explain to me what that means. And he said, well, when a kid comes to kindergarten, one of the big factors is, do they know what the alphabet is? Can they identify the letter B, for example? And he just calls this basics. And he showed that the statistics were that the kids who were born during the Great Recession, by the time they got to kindergarten or first grade, that their ready to learn factors had plummeted. And I said, what's driving this? He says, Mike, it's economic pressure on the parents. And he said, this shows you that parents are so busy trying to make a living, trying to survive, et cetera, that the amount of time they're spending reading with kids has plummeted. And he said, just reading with your child helps a kid identify, helps a kid come ready to learn, et cetera. And so you're absolutely right. And we saw the stats in Crook County. We saw the stats in other parts of my district. Economic pressures on parents is a big factor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And we see it everywhere we go in Oregon. We see it at the gas station. We see it at the groceries, everywhere it's at. And it's we've had now decades of Democrat policy go through. And I don't know. I hope that this is the eye opener to seeing that it's not working. Only time can tell, but there is so many young families that I talk to on almost a daily basis that they are struggling. They're struggling to get a home. They're struggling to buy groceries. And then at the end of the day, when you should be reading that book, that 15-minute time period to your child or children, guess what? You're exhausted and you want to go to bed.
Exhausted.
You don't have any ounce of time left in you. And it is so sad. It is so sad to see an economy that the children are the ones not flourishing the most.
Well, and I keep hearing you say it's about the kids when you're talking about economic pressures because they want to provide for the kids. When you're talking about being so disappointed in the education committee, it's because the kids were not served, right? But yet when we're talking about budget or the budget rolls around for education in the legislature, that's all they say. It's for the kids. It's for the kids. Or if there's a strike or something happening at a local level, it's, we support our teachers and we love our teachers and it's for the kids. And the answer, both of those are true. It should be true. Of course it's for the kids, or of course it should be for the kids. And of course we love our teachers. Teachers are great. We're not hammering teachers. But, we talked about some of the stats before with enrollment plummeting, teachers going down, but staff going up. And this is why parents should be outraged. Out of 81,000 school and district employees, only 31,000 are teachers. So 38.5% of education employees are teachers. Now, we know that in order to run a school, you need to have maintenance people and you need to have administrators. You need to have people that are answering the phones and you need to have coaches, et cetera, et cetera. But only 38% of education employees are teachers. That's wild. And we should be outraged. It shouldn't be 38%. And so when we're talking about budget, and if we're being honest, of course we support our teachers. Of course we love our teachers. They're teaching our next generation. But you're only looking at 38% of our employees. That is a lot of middle management. It's too much administration. It's a lot of assistance in the classroom as well.
Yeah, it's, that brings a good reminder to myself of a little story that I had with the superintendent. It was a small district, and I remember talking to the superintendent about the grant process and what that looks like. A lot of grants, a lot of funding, or a lot of grants come through ODE, the agency that runs our education system. In order for him, so a lot of school districts or larger school districts will hire a six-figure job, six-figure full-time employee just to write their grants.
Really?
Just to get money from ODE.
So there'll be a full-time person inside the school district.
Full-time person.
Inside the school district.
Yes.
That will then write grants to try to get more money from the...
So
Grants
this
for
story
what?
for him, summer school, different
Okay.
learning programs that they might want or need. This particular superintendent, his story was quite interesting because he actually they did not have, a lot of the smaller districts do not have the capability of hiring a 6-figure individual to only write their grants. So he took it upon himself, which a lot of the superintendents do, to of course write and do this application for this particular grant. After months of him going through the process of working to get the grant, he then sat down and he had tracked his hours at how much time he'd put into this. The amount of hours he put into it was the cost of the grant. The amount of hours he spent, so his salary, it was a net zero.
So if you look across the board, that's millions of dollars being spent in just personnel that goes to those numbers that I just said, that goes to personnel to apply for grants to get more money from our Department of Education inside this state to get more money to schools.
Correct.
We are messed up.
Right.
And that's a process put into place at some point from legislation that's passed over the years or rules that are made by the ODE.
And we spoke about it. It's not like these were not issues that we didn't talk about in our education committee. And they'll sit there and tell you that they're working on it. But when it comes down to the bottom line, nothing has been fixed at all.
That sounds a lot because you talked about, especially in smaller rural districts and not being able to have the personnel to do that. It sounds a lot like small business and being able to have, big business can have HR departments and safety departments, and they can absorb the amount of rules and regulation. Not to say that it's too costly, because there is a cost of regulation inside businesses and inside schools. I mean, schools are having to do this too. But then you look at small business, they can't hire a full-time HR person to deal with the just layers of regulation that that's coming at them. It's the same thing. All of these things that we pass that doesn't change the needle, that doesn't move the needle, like you mentioned, we're still passing them. And the schools still have to implement them, which means they have to hire more people, and none of that goes to kids.
So you've got kids coming to school with economic pressures on parents that, and then we find that our third grade reading levels are falling behind. And I'd heard a stat, I don't know if this is accurate or not, that 40% of Oregon fourth graders are not reading at level, which is, I hope that's embellished. It's shocking.
I don't think it is. I think
It's
that's
not.
pretty spot on.
And so a kid gets into, elementary, you got middle school or junior high and high school. So what's happening in the classroom in your experience? And, obviously, your time on the education committee, your advocacy, your work on behalf of your district, which is phenomenal, the effort you put in. What's happening in the classroom, that is disrupting kids progressing in their learning?
Well, I think that from my perspective and what I've seen, it's a number of different things. Of course, at the time, cell phones were a big issue. Certainly not the only issue. A lot of teachers are incredibly frustrated. We have tied their hands in a lot of ways. Usually they're not able to really do much at all for any kind of discipline measures when it comes to children not doing what they're supposed to or paying attention. And Shelly, as you may remember, in 2023, I believe it was, that we also passed Senate Bill 819, which was changing the way that abbreviated school days were going to be in place for students with disabilities. So we've also grouped all of these children together, individuals, some students who need a lot more help and attention if they have some type of disability or learning disability. And it's disruptive to the class, and it's disruptive to other students and their learning. So we've done a number of different things to create a classroom that is not successful. And teachers are very frustrated.
I would imagine, because on the one hand, it's certainly, my understanding is mainstreaming kids with disabilities with, kids who don't have them. There's a lot of good that can be done from that. Now we've seen from some of that experience that, the good has some negatives. And so that's one factor. I guess it's, as you said, it's hard to pinpoint, the one factor, but so they're dealing with all sorts of things and they're handcuffed on discipline. I mean, I certainly am not advocating for the discipline that, our parents' generation had, but, and I know where I grew up, they, Mr. Hartley in 5th grade had a paddle.
Mr. Hartley.
Harry Hartley, and who was a great teacher, great man. I admired him very much. And, but yeah, you'd get a SWAT. And obviously that was dated, but what do they do now because I've talked to teachers who say, some kid is disruptive. You have to call the principal and they have to come down and, but that's all time away. And if you're a student wanting to learn, you're just sitting there waiting for this disruption to end. Is that correct?
I don't know if I have a great answer for it, but students are not being, right. So I didn't have the paddle.
You didn't have Harry Hartley
I didn't have
from Condon?
Good old Mr. Hartley.
But I think Shelly and I can probably reminisce that we had similar situations where if you're being disruptive, you leave the class, or you get sent to the office, or you get, of course, it was horrible if a kid got expelled. And those measures are just not happening. I think when you have this classroom that does have children with higher disabilities, some of them do act out, and maybe it's their disability. It's not always behavioral. Sometimes, obviously, behavioral as well. But sometimes it's just a distraction, and teachers are not able to honestly do much about it. And most kids are not. I don't know that I haven't heard of any kids being expelled. Maybe it's out there. I don't know that for sure.
You'd have to do a lot.
But
I think
you'd bring the numbers low.
The bar's pretty high. I represented a kid in federal court who was expelled, but it was for speech, and he was a senior in high school, and it was in a class called Politics and People, and so, on a day in which they were discussing a topic, because he had the schedule, he had a T-shirt that had a political statement on it, but it was also the topic of the class. But he was told to cover up his T-shirt, and eventually he unzipped his hoodie to reveal the T-shirt again, and was kicked out and suspended from school. But that was speech. And I know one of the issues is, from a legal standpoint, is the behavior, at least when it comes to speech, is it being disruptive? Because, the free speech limitations in schools are different. But disruption, so that's obviously ongoing. You've got other rules. Cell phones. All right, that was a topic. Should kids have cell phones in schools, or at least in the classroom? And it passed the House, right?
It did pass the House.
Didn't pass the Senate. It was never put on the floor to vote for it. The governor signed an executive order. So, Tracy, yay, nay?
That's a tough one, because I do see both sides of it. And of course, being a mom myself, I would want access to speaking to my own children. So it didn't need a bill. That is the one thing that I do love about Oregon's school system is that there is a lot of local control. And so it certainly did not need a bill. Local districts, school boards could make this decision on their own if they wanted to. And being the Republican I am, I love the hands-off approach of you need to figure this out and work together. As my dad always said, the law is for the lawless. And so I have a hard time, or I think I would have maybe had a hard time voting on it. But when you look at the system as a whole, most certainly it is a real problem of students not being appropriate with their cell phones, of course, being on social media in the day and time that we live now, kids in social media and that K through 12 sector is just so detrimental. So it is a massive issue. I still stand by, I think local districts should be able to make that decision for what's best for their kids.
So if you're in your classroom, if you had the authority to say to kids, all right, here's a basket, here's a box, whatever, put your cell phones away, we're going to be covering this subject, would you do that?
I don't understand why it can't be like when I was in school, and a lot of us didn't have cell phones at that time, but the overall theory is, 3 times and you're out. So keep your cell phone on you. And if I see it more than 3 times, unless you need to use it for an emergency situation, then you're giving it to me. Why not that? Why not that?
Discipline.
Why doesn't
Right.
it go back to, hey, you're a good kid who wants your cell phone and you're not being disruptive with it and you're paying attention and I don't see it, keep it on you. If you're not and you're going to continue to use it, and usually it's the same children that will continue down that same path, then you don't get to have it. It's pretty simple, really.
Yeah,
it's actually not that complicated.
That's actually a good idea. You could say, keep it in your bag, keep it in your pack, keep it in your pocket. And if I see it, I mean, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it that way, because if I was in a classroom, I would say, I don't want to see him at all.
Right.
And put them up or whatever, because you want their focus.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to teach math, history, language, or do something cross curricula, you want to be able to, have their attention.
Right.
And God knows you can't teach, or let me put it, it's very hard to learn when you're scrolling reels
Right.
on Instagram. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I do scroll reels on Instagram, and on occasion, I'm certainly not a proficient social media user, but I like that, and I still use Facebook, so that dates me.
Yeah.
But
Me too.
but it's you can't multitask like
No.
that,
Right.
despite how many people can argue.
Mm-hmm.
I can multitask, and I'm like, no, not in schools.
Yeah.
No. Well, I think, you can only learn if you're there, right? You've got to be present and you got to be paying attention, to your point. But maybe grab the last topic, or maybe one of the last topics. You can't learn if you're not there. So let's talk about absenteeism in our schools and how much worse it's gotten. So this came out, and we'll put it up on the screen, but it's the share of students that are chronically absent, and where it's changed from, say, 2019 to current. And I'll just throw a couple of them out. So Salem Kaiser School went from 26% to 43%. 43%. And so they are saying they're considered chronically absent if they miss more than 10% of their days enrolled. So that's how they're quantifying it.
43%.
43%. The highest is Reynolds School District, and that's 45% of their students are what you would call chronically absent. And so you go down, Salem Kaiser, which is local here, 43%. I'll grab mine. Albany went from 23% to 35%. And the lowest absenteeism, as far as I'm going to guess, they grabbed the biggest school district, is Lake Oswego. They went from 11% to 18%. And there's Sherwood, Westland, Wilsonville, which is on the bottom there, which isn't surprising. The highest ones are Reynolds at 45%, Salem Kaiser at 43%, Gresham, Barlow, Centennial, and Springfield are all in 40% as well.
So Tracy,
That many gone.
Yeah,
Wild.
In your experience, in again, you're a well-known and very focused advocate for kids in schools in your area, but what has been your experience that, or at least, what do you think, based on your experience, is driving that?
I mean, I'd go back to the conversation we had earlier with this systemic economic failure that we've had in Oregon. And when mom and dad aren't around, the state legislature they show no real interest in making parents a part of the conversation. This is the result. When no one cares if you're there, when you don't have real graduation requirements to graduate, so what does it matter if you're there? You can still graduate. You can figure out the credits, you can figure out, there's no real incentive for these kids to show up. There's no accountability for them to be there. There's no accountability in the education system almost as a whole. And I'm not trying to pick on the districts. I think we have really great teachers and great people that are very much involved. But the agency, ODE, is a disaster, and we have done nothing to fix it. Why?
Who's the superintendent of education in the state? Tina Kotek. So the buck stops here.
That's
right?
our governor.
So the governor in the state of Oregon is the superintendent of public education. And I will point out, and we'll throw it up on the screen, that on her webpage, this is from her own webpage, her list of accomplishments, it says promoted school attendance. So as we're talking about school attendance, they actually listed that as a accomplishment in promoting it. Governor Tina Kotek signed a proclamation declaring the month of September 2024 as Attendance Awareness Month. And I don't know if they saw these numbers getting worse and worse, so they said we have to do something, and that was their idea of
A press release
and saying that we're aware of it, that we're aware that we
Right.
need to have attendance. But these numbers are dismal. To have a school district have 45% of their students chronically absent, how do you teach? You can't teach in that environment. You certainly can't learn as another student that maybe you're not absent all the time, but your colleagues are always absent. Your schoolmates are always absent. That means that you're not getting the education that you deserve and that you need in order to better yourself and better your future. And so the problems you mentioned are systemic, and they seem to kind of snowball, right? There's all these little things, whether it's economic pressures. We've talked extensively about cost of living in this state. It's too high. It's top of mind for people. The stress is certainly there. The dollars that we're spending are incredibly high, and the results are incredibly low. And I would suggest that we need some bold change, and certainly a change of trajectory, like you said, in order to move the needle.
I couldn't agree more. It's, and I think that we're all seeing, of course, you see, and we're talking about K through 12, but then we are seeing it on the other spectrum, I'm sure, as a small business owner. You see it too, Shelly. But there's a lot of small businesses that I talk to, and trying to hire these kids that have recently graduated. They don't show up to interviews on time. They don't know how. Recently, I went to a small business and spoke to them, and they hire a lot of young, maybe even high schoolers or just graduated, and they don't know how to address an envelope. And they don't know how taxes work. They don't know who pays for the education system. It is, and I'm not necessarily blaming them. I'm not blaming the kids. It's us as adults. It's us as the state legislature that has failed them time and time again. And this is our future. We are shooting ourselves in the foot. These are our kids that are going to grow up and are supposed to be and will, and I pray to God they'll figure it out, but they are the ones that are going to be driving our economy in Oregon. And we are just we're not doing them any justice.
We're asleep at the wheel.
So what is, what are some programs which, we've talked about FFA on this podcast because Shelly and I are both fans of FFA. And, in your experience and in your district, what are some of the extracurricular activities that create incentives or that are keeping kids in schools? In how can the state support that? Because I'm assuming if it's keeping a kid in school and, nothing breeds success like the taste of success. And if you're giving kids a taste of success, whether it's on a volleyball court or a football field or a, FFA program, what works and how can the state support that?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, I don't think anything's going to change until we start taking parents seriously. I don't think that you're going to see any, we know as legislatures, you can go in there and write a bill. And if it's not the right policy, it's not going to do a dang thing.
Yeah.
And the education sector and kids are no different. You're not going to write something and say, okay, you're going to go to jail for not showing up to school. Like that's obviously not going to work. That's not what we want. I'm not trying to follow Harris in that regards of jailing parents.
Gosh, that's right. I forgot
Bad
about
reference, maybe, but that does exist. So, it really comes down to, and I stressed while I was on the committee of partnering with parents, of listening to parents, of trying to engage these kids. These kids, it is really fun when you, especially the age that my kids are at, but they want to learn. They do want to learn. And at some point, I think some of these kids fall through so many cracks that they become, they wear labels on themselves that are not true, but the system has failed them. And they go on, whether that's I'm stupid or I can't do this or I don't know how to read or, all these different failures that sometimes kids adopt. And it's so detrimental. But we as legislatures and in that committee did not want to partner or do anything or listen to parents at all. There was several committees that I tried to add parents to that they absolutely would not do it. And it's not going to change. There are great programs out there. I love FFA. I love, there's a business,
FBLA.
DECA? Oh, FBLA.
FBLA.
Yeah.
There's several things that I think that can contribute to children and have them excited about learning and excited about showing up. But if you don't engage the parents, and if you don't have a working relationship, so right now, in my opinion, the agency ODE is doing their own thing, the districts are doing their own thing, and then the parents are doing their own thing. And we're trying to somehow in a very messy way, bring them, they're not bringing them together. And that's what has to be done. ODE as an agency should be coming along these districts and saying, how do we make this better? How do we create a grant process that you're not spending millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars just to apply for it? Mm-hmm. How do we streamline this so that we can make this efficient? How does ODE have, 500 employees? I believe
they added that many
565 employees
at the Department of Education.
That's a consultant firm that has in a private sector that has horrible numbers. And yet, if it was private and you're a consultant and you're giving me these kind of data points, you're fired.
Right.
What you are doing is not working. But we continue down the same path of it not working, of let's throw more money at it. Let's make ODE bigger. Mm-hmm. Let's not try to figure out some of the massive issues. ODE doesn't come alongside the districts. I had superintendents telling me that they would receive up to 25 emails a day from ODE that they have to respond to. So now all these superintendents have massive amount of stress in their own lives. When I was in the legislature, and I don't have the exact data point, but the vast majority of superintendents were all brand new. It was like 85% of superintendents in 2023 that were all brand new to that position.
That's wild.
And
why?
You know, you mentioned also about identity and kids adopting false identities, or at least believing a false identity about themselves. And, you know, that's of course a bigger picture, but, you know, when kids are in families aren't being served, you know, and you have so many sources, social media and et cetera, coming outside, I mean, I would imagine that is almost like a pandemic of false identities. I mean, because, you know, if you believe a lie about yourself, that you aren't a good reader just because you have struggled early, or I'm not good at math, that can be a lifelong trajectory.
Yeah, it can, and it is. And that was another conversation on the education committee, was that I think as young children are maybe adopting those labels is so false. But what else is happening that is just blows my mind is that we're actually seeing a lot of children now becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs, where we are opening our own high schools that are rehab facilities that the state is funding, because we have such a horrible issue with the amount of, I mean, does anything else break your heart anymore? That these kids, you know, very young, are being addicted to alcohol and drugs.
Well, that would be a post-COVID. I'm sure we've always had issues, obviously, but this post-COVID world that we're living in is certainly different. I think that Oregon, you know, the whole world dealt with it, but I think Oregon was hit in one of the worst. Obviously, that's because of the leadership decisions that were being made. And I think that I truly believe, if you were to ask Kate Brown today and how she dealt with the school situation, I think that she would say she was wrong. I really, truly believe she would say that we screwed that up. Yeah. That I listened to the unions and I shouldn't have. I believe that. I mean, that's for her to say. Yeah. But I do know that we now study it, right? You look back and you see how did that happen, or what's been done since then. A study of 30 states by Harvard and Stanford on learning rebounds from the pandemic showed Oregon students were the only group that has failed to return to pre-pandemic levels in either reading or math skills. That's, I think, to me, one of the worst, to say you're the only state that hasn't rebounded. We have a new governor, it's not Kate Brown anymore, and Tina Kotek, who's the superintendent of the schools. You're spending too much. You're not getting the results. If there's any CEO of any business that had this kind of results with the funding there, they would be fired. And so I think that that's the reality that parents, as we're talking about, you know, the lack of teachers, the students leaving the public school system, the disciplinary problems that's there, and we're not turning it around. That's a problem. Parents should be outraged. They're not being included. And it really, truly, Mike, you say this all the time, it's up to people to stand up and vote differently. We're coming up on an election season this next year, and Oregonians have an opportunity, parents have an opportunity to make a change, and that happens at the ballot box.
So, Tracy, tell us about your Senate district.
Yeah. So it includes, I don't know if I said that earlier, but it includes Woodburn, Jervis Brooks, Salem, Kaiser. Currently, the senator is Kim Thatcher. I have been endorsed by her, which I'm very fortunate to say. And I'm excited. There's a lot of really great momentum, and it's kicking off. Of course, we have a few months to go, but it's all looking very good.
Well, and you have been endorsed by the Oregon Discussion, a Government Efficiency podcast. The co-host, Senator Mike McLane and Representative Shelly Boshart Davis endorse you.
Oh, thank you.
We are so thrilled. And your district needs an advocate. Kim Thatcher's been great, focused. We love Kim. She's been on the podcast talking about public safety. Of course, you know, she's been such a strong advocate of due process and justice, and you are a great successor, and your advocacy is, of course, going to be for your district in a lot of respects, but obviously kids, schools, families, and we just wish you the best success.
Thank you.
Well, and I hear
Thank you.
you say over and over again, it's the parents. Parents need to be involved. Parents need to be heard. And so if I were a parent in your district, I would be asking, I would be voting for you, one, and I would be excited to hear that you, above all else, want to have parents involved in education and in their schools' decisions. And also your just understanding of the stress that parents are going through and wanting to make a change so that they can live a better life, provide for their children, and provide a better future in this state. So thank you for running and for being an advocate for parents and for students.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Tracy, how does, you know, a listener support you? Website, volunteer, signs?
Yeah, I have it all. TracyForOregon.com. Of course, there's a plethora of information on my website, so that's probably the number one way to get involved. But absolutely, we always are needing volunteers, and that can look a lot of different ways, whether that's putting signs up or just taking a sign or making phone calls or door knocking. There's lots of different ways. And of course, donations. I am fundraising, and it will take a considerable amount of effort to make sure that we hold this seat, and I'm willing to put in the work and excited to do so. But I do need help.
TracyForOregon.com. All right. You've heard it. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.